So I'm glad you brought up the point about labels and identity. So I printed out a sheet of racial classifications in Latin America. In a 1976 census that was done in Brazil, does anybody want to take a guess at how many classifications there were of race? There was 134 categories of race in Brazil. And I need to note that Brazil actually has the highest population of people of African descent outside of Nigeria. So there are more black people in Brazil than there are in the United States. So despite Pharrell's video Beautiful, where you have these Cabinasian women looking around me, running around the streets of Brazil, if you go there, any of us go there, like I was there in 2004, and people kept coming up to me in the street saying, you know, like talking to me in Portuguese, and I was like, no, soy de los Estados Unidos, but they were like, but negra, like, you know, just like I had a bush too, and they were like putting on my hair and everything. And then I remember someone, well, I'll bring that point up later. So I just want to mention some of the categories. We have, there's 134, so I can't read all of them. But we have like alva, pure white. We have something that means tinted or bleach white. We have something with pink highlights, something bluish, azul. Then there's branca suja, dirty white. There's cafe or coffee. There's chocolate brown. There's tints of coffee. There's milky. There's golden tan, mid Negro, honey colored, mixed, blonde hair and white skin, pale blonde, like a fruit, the deep red color of a blood orange, dark, mostly white, jaundice, little servant, little servant or slave, right? No doubt about it, I guess that's one as well. Bronze tan, cinnamon light brunette, light tan, purplish tan, brown hue tan, dusky tan, very dark, almost mulatto, mocha, toffee light, wheat colored, mixture of white and Negro, lighter skinned white Negro, lighter skinned white Negro, pale, the color of some type of wood that I don't know, lighter skinned person of a mixed race. Then there's one Polish features prostitute, dusky, black of a lighter hue, more like a white than a mulatto, almost Negro, burnt, suntan, sunburnt, regular, nondescript. Hey, you can be regular in Brazil. Burnish rose, so toasted, opaque, greenish, reddish. Wow, mulatto with reddish, kinky hair. So. My next question is, I think historically in the United States, the one drop rule is what we've gone by, meaning if you have one drop of black blood, then you are a black person. Whereas in, the United States was colonized primarily by the British. And in Latin American countries and Caribbean countries, where you had the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the French, who instituted their rule and their law, you clearly have these various categories. So, does the one drop rule makes a person black? Where like in New Orleans, you have like my former boss, who people were asking me all the time, is he black? I thought this was a black museum. I'm like, did you hear him speak? Like, have you seen him walk? Like, Dr. McKinley's a black man, but you have this, you have this man who sounds quote unquote black, but he appears to be a white person. So does the one drop rule, is that accurate in terms of being able to identify as being a black person?
I was talking to Yaba before we began, and we touched upon quite a few things having to do with skin color. But we did not talk about something I did want to tell her about, which was religion. Before the Spaniards came to the Americas, they had a 700-year war, ongoing war with the Moors, who occupied most of southern Spain and southern Europe. And so the Spaniards were more obsessed about religion. The dichotomy: I'm Muslim. You're Muslim. I'm Spaniard. You're worshiping the devil, I have the only true God. And so when you come to the Caribbean and most of Latin America, from what I've read, or so-called Latin America, you find that there has been a lot more of a focus on what are you worshiping rather than what's the color of your skin. And so once a person who has a predominantly African phenotype, is a Christian and speaks Spanish, and they're raising their children according to those very ethnic elements, then there is less of a focus on skin color. Skin color continues to have an influence, but it seems that through the adoption of these ways of living of the conqueror or the enslavers, then the so-called enslaved says to himself or herself, I can be more accepted if I do this or that. Nevertheless, there is quite a bit of an obsession. It has been there historically. I remember when I was in high school in Santo Domingo, I had friends who had the same last name, Vargas, twice, and you would talk to them, and they were sons and daughters of like first cousins who were very light skinned, and so they didn't want to mix with not pure people, so they were married, and of course the offsprings, the product of these such close relationships, filial relationships, would sometimes create people and kids who were obviously touched in the head, So you would stop there and think, wow, you're trying to keep your blood pure, and you are like creating kids who can't sit down in a room for 2 hours to listen to a teacher talk about anything, because they're like, they have problems, it's obvious. And in that sense, I think that you have a combination of factors. It varies from nation to nation, particularly when you have the Anglo, so-called Latino umbrellas, you have Portugal, in Brazil today, and then the rest of the countries being predominantly by Spanish influence, and here being an Anglo-Saxon Protestant, kind of a little different sort of, work ethic, culture, and things like that.
I think we have to have a historical conversation in the sense that you have to question and check how the rule came to be in the first place. And historically speaking, the rule was created to protect whiteness, right? So it was this notion that one drop of black blood was enough to taint you, right? To the extent that, in the same way that you look at these classifications, I've seen writings where they break it down, 1/4 black and 3/4, whatever, in the same way for people to understand where you fit. And at the end of the day, at the core, it was a protection of whiteness. So in this moment now, I think black people have kind of remixed it and looked at it as though we're so inclusive, So if you got one black, one drop, come on, you're black. But in this moment, I don't know that we should be in the business of forcing people to accept blackness, because I think that there's some psychological ramifications of doing that, and you don't want everybody on your team anyway. So
I agree.